Good evening, my friends. Are you here for another spooky story? Then come on in. Settle in now, for tonight I have quite the tale to tell. Are you ready? Good. Then let us begin. This video marks my 50th video on this channel. Woo! Finally, the true stories seem to have surpassed the Reddit and fictional stories that I started out posting. I'm very excited about that. Since I don't have that much else to say for an introduction tonight, let's skip right into tonight's true story about a very close call. So gather round, my friends, and listen well. To some wishes are better left ungranted. People who grow up in small towns usually feel one of two ways. They absolutely love the place and could never dream of living anywhere else, or they vehemently hate it with a passion. I was one of the latter. It wasn't that I didn't like the mountains per se. In fact, I still miss the deep woodlands with the musty, earthy scent of decaying leaves, the natural springs you could find everywhere, and the general feel of something just special being in that land. But I never really fit in there for a variety of reasons, some of which I've alluded to in other videos, but my main driving force was because I really wanted to be able to enjoy my life without having the pressure and later terror of dealing with toxic relatives. To keep this brief, I had grown up with a very unpredictable mother who had quite a few unhealthy thought processes, many of which she tried to convince me were otherwise. Who knows? Perhaps that's the reason why she has so much poltergeist activity in her house. In my late teenage years, I started realizing that a lot of the way I was made to think wasn't right. For example, my friends didn't jump at the sound of a car door slamming outside and immediately hop to their feet, ready to leave because their mother got mad at them over something from months ago and decided right then to take it out on them. While I was coming to this realization, I was seeing some of my classmates starting to give up around me. Back there aren't a lot of opportunities for employment. Unless your family has a farm or one of the few businesses there, you get into the military, or you know people that live elsewhere, you don't have a lot of choices. Having a car and a couple $100 to get you your own place somewhere can be the makers or breakers for a lot of people. Living in an impoverished area like that without much hope for a future can really get to some of them. I've seen some girls my age attach themselves to far older men, even abusive ones, just to have a slim chance at getting away from bad homes. Some just become the next generation in their family to live on welfare and not try anymore. Others turned to religion and went so far off the deep end they may as well have had an anchor tied to them. Still others turned to drugs and drinking, some of which I've learned died very young. Then there are those that did other reckless activity to hasten their end, or just took matters into their own hands. I didn't want to end up like any of them, so I studied hard and tried my best to get out. And the problem with that is, even if you have a college degree, if the region doesn't have many jobs, then it won't help you out that much. So, after returning from an internship, I started working at local jobs in order to build up funds so I could leave again. I managed to land a tough but well-paying job for that area, eventually. And while I was still worn out from having to deal with the drama at home and putting in even more hours after work to keep up my mother's property, it gave me a chance to occasionally go and visit some of the few friends I had that wouldn't send my mother into a psychotic rage if I went near them. Mind you, my friends were all goofy, geeky people whose idea of a good time was binge-watching anime and playing Kingdom Hearts until the wee hours of the morning. The craziest thing we did was try to cram 4 people into a car and somehow manage to get a 7-foot-tall scythe in there with us. Alice, if you're listening to this, you're still awesome. Of course, my friends were as supportive as they could be over the idea of me trying to get out of my hometown and away from all that. At the same time, I had a friend who was going through some major problems of her own. Her family had been going through financial difficulties for a while, and To make matters worse, they wound up being evicted from their house. For a couple of months, they had to squeeze into a trailer with one of her cousin's families, only to have to break down and move again, this time in with her grandfather and another couple of cousins, when her father's job fell through. Even though she had a degree like I did, she didn't have a car nor a way to catch a ride if she did find one of the few jobs in her area, so she felt useless. Since we were in the same boat and I felt a bit better off, I came up with an ingenious idea. I'll help her find a job in an apartment so we can be roommates. This seemed to bring some of the life back into my friend, whom we'll call Sadie for the rest of this story. A few counties over from where she lived was a very popular tourist spot, and there were a lot more jobs there. I figured we could capitalize on some of the seasonal jobs there and then maybe move on to the nearest metro area. Besides, she could just catch a ride with me to work for a while, and if we got hired on at the same place, all the better. Thus began our search. While I worked hard for most of the week at the factory, I would drive out to her place early on Sunday, pick her up, and go cruise for potential places to work and live. During the week, I did my own searches and put in applications online as well. The search was wearing me out, but about a month in, opportunities started turning up, and I had several interviews. Things were looking up. Or so I thought. All of the interviews turned out to lead nowhere. At one job, I got all the way there, only for a guard to tell me I had to park at a distant parking lot some ways away. By the time I even managed to get to a parking space, I was late. And when I called to tell the interviewer what happened, they sent me back up to park close to the building again, where the guard turned me in the direction of the other parking lot. By that point, I needed to go to the bathroom for nearly 45 minutes, so I called and told the interviewer that I was just going to cancel, because I hadn't come all that way out to run my gas out just because they couldn't coordinate where interviewees were supposed to go. The next interview wound up being in a bad area with a real jerk of an interviewer. He flat out told me he was only interested in hiring men with business degrees, but his boss had him interviewing women anyway. I intended to actually speak to the corporate part of the company about it, but I wound up settling for wasting his time in the interview since he wanted to be an ass and waste my time. He had quite the funny look on his face when I replied to his question of, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" with deadpanned as the director of a funeral home. The gulp and awkward sputtering he did afterwards was worth the trip. What can I say? I have a bit of a sadistic streak. The interview after that turned out to not even be in the same state. The company, a very popular photography chain, had actually input the wrong branch location by mistake on their website, and since the pay wasn't really enough to make me want to move to another area that didn't have many opportunities, I turned it down. My fourth interview wound up being at the same place I applied to initially, only the offer came later. Since it was the same person who talked to me last time, giving me the exact same parking instructions that gave me the runaround before, I decided to not chance it and skip that one. I did wind up with a few good offers, none of which would have been the usual 3 to 3.5 times the amount of rent that most apartment complexes require before allowing you to put in an application. However, this would have been fine if both of us had been working, but there was one little problem. Sadie seemed to be having the same problem as me. Or so I thought. At that point, having a few rides to interviews would not have been a problem, because her cousin was more than willing to help out. The problem turned out to be that, after the first few applications, Sadie just stopped filling them out at all. I was stumped. Didn't this girl tell me how bad her home life was? How useless she felt for not working, and how her family was constantly nagging her for not having a job, despite the fact that it was hard for her to find consistent transport to one. That wasn't all. Since the work at the factory started getting more difficult and there were major issues going on at my house, I was getting beyond worn out. My mother started asking me for more and more money for her own personal bills, so it was all I could do to keep things stable. I nearly passed out from exhaustion and my feet hurting so bad from a week on the factory floors, at least several times during trips with Sadie. Finally, things came to a head one Sunday, and I realized that Sadie wasn't ever going to put in the same effort I was to get out. I was exhausted, depressed, and dealing with a strained shoulder for the last few weeks, but I still had been trying hard to get us both out long after I could have left on my own. At that point, I just threw my hands up and said screw it, and the idea of becoming roomies with one of my best friends from college just crumbled into dust. Fast forward a few years. At this point, I had already moved halfway across the country and was rooming with another friend from college when I got the news. The very place Sadie and I had planned to move was on fire. No, I don't mean a specific apartment complex. I mean 2 whole towns had to be evacuated because of wildfires. In the end, most of the area was able to rebuild, but 13 people died because they couldn't make it off the mountains in time. Several places Sadie and I went to on a trip with my grandparents had been reduced to nothing but cinders. All I could do when I found out was keep tabs on the news, watching in horror as the fire claimed more and more land that Sadie and I used to pass by. With as poor as we both were, there's a possibility that, if we had lived there, we might have lost our places of employment and had to leave in a hurry. In fact, we might have lost everything. I remember sitting on the couch, realizing that, even though it had taken me a couple of years longer to get out, mostly because I ran through most of my savings from that one job trying to keep my mother from going crazy on me, I could have lost everything if the 2 of us had moved. Maybe even our lives. I do want to leave off on a positive note. The year after I moved, Sadie went back to college. She still didn't have a car, but she had told me that she found 2 jobs within walking distance. I'm sure some of you have guessed at this point, but Sadie had some bad depression going on, which started making it harder and harder for her to do normal things later on. She pretty much dropped off the face of the earth a few months after this conversation, so I haven't a clue how she is. Still, I hope she's doing better in life, and I'm proud of her for managing to get out there and try to get something going on with her life. Well, my friends, did you enjoy this tale? If you did, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell too, that way you can catch your latest spooky fix the moment it comes out. Also, do me a favor and head on over to my Patreon page at patreon.com/phantasmalpoppy. Even pledging $1 a month helps out yours truly since this channel is still so small. So please, and thank you. Good night, and see you all real soon.